Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. And now, Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, Jay Sekulow.
Hey everybody, we've got some really breaking news here, and this is really unprecedented. The fight for life is something we take very seriously at the ACLJ, as you know. This is something we've been engaged in for 40 years. But we've had something that is unprecedented in our history. We filed a complaint for discrimination against the University of Vermont because they were compelling nurses who had religious objections to abortions and forced their participation. It was forced coercion in abortion procedures. And we filed a complaint with not only with the university, but also with the federal government, Health and Human Services. This is a copy of the complaint. I'm holding it in my hands right now. What's redacted is the name of the nurses. We're not going to disclose that right now. But I have a big announcement, and that is the Department of Health and Human Services issued an order in our favor against the University of Vermont. We'll go into the particulars in a moment. But this could cost the University of Vermont $500,000 a year in federal funding. They are compelling coerced, forced abortion procedures involving nurses. In other words, the nurses were forced to participate in abortion procedures when they had staff that would have done it without an objection on the religious grounds. In this particular case, it's very important to understand this, they knew of the religious objections of our clients and then went forward and forced them to participate in this abortion procedure.
Yeah, I want to make sure this is clear to you. This comes from the federal government HHS release, the Health and Human Services.gov, for immediate release today, August 28, 2019. On May 9, 2018, a nurse at UVMMC, that's the University of Vermont Medical Center, filed a conscience and religious discrimination complaint with OCR. We, the ACLJ, represent that nurse. So we filed that complaint with the Office of Civil Rights at HHS against the University of Vermont Medical Center, which is in Burlington, Vermont, and receives federal funds from HHS.
To the tune of about $500,000 a year.
Contending that the nurse was forced to assist in abortion in violation of the nurse's conscience rights. As part of its investigation,
this is coming right from their document.
Yes, from HHS. It's not from ACLJ. This is from your federal government, Trump administration, HHS. OCR contacted UVMMC repeatedly in a good faith effort to seek cooperation from the hospital, but the hospital refused to conform its policies to federal conscience laws, provide all the documents requested by Office of Civil Rights, or produce witnesses for the Office of Civil Rights to interview. Nevertheless, OCR interviewed multiple witnesses and gathered evidence concerning the allegation, and then it gets really troubling from there. One.
Well, here's what I want to do about this.
The first part is the key.
Okay, read the first one. There are 5 findings that are very significant here. We're going to take them one at a time, but we'll do the first one now before the break.
Yes.
We'll get to the other ones when we come back.
Because this is direct to our client and direct to the work of the ACLJ. We filed this complaint with HHS. We put them on notice. HHS then did their investigation, and they found this. Specifically determined that, 1, the University of Vermont Medical Center forced the nurse complainant to assist in abortion against the nurse's religious or moral objection. The nurse had expressed an objection for many years and was included in a list of objectors, but UVMMC knowingly assigned the nurse to an abortion procedure. They forced her to take part in abortion, violating federal conscience laws while they receive federal taxpayer dollars.
And they knew that she had objections on conscience. So it was forced abortion coercion participation. That's what this is. And this is the finding. We're going to get into the actual findings from HHS. This is a huge victory. But this also points to the fact that we don't just talk about the issues here. We don't just work on legislation, which is all important. But we actually are in court or dealing with agencies defending life. And you're seeing that victory today. And your support of the ACLJ and standing up for life makes a huge difference. You saw it right here. We always have a petition up defending life. We encourage you to do it. We also encourage you to support the work of the ACLJ. You see victories like this. You could do that at aclj.org. We'll be back with more in just a moment.
Pro-life doctors and nurses are being pressured and even forced into assisting in abortions. Pharmacists are targeted for refusing to dispense abortion pills. The right of conscience, the right not to violate one's faith, is one of the most sacred rights we all possess. Federal laws protect medical professionals and religious hospitals from being forced to violate their faith, but many times these federal laws are ignored or unenforced. At the ACLJ, we're defending doctors, nurses, and other medical professionals. We filed formal public comments supporting a new federal rule ensuring that conscience rights will be protected and that entities that force medical professionals to perform or assist in abortions will lose federal taxpayer funding. But now the radical left and the abortion industry are filing lawsuits to overturn this rule. Sign on today to our petition to stop doctors and nurses from being forced to perform abortions. Add your name online, aclj.org.
So if you're just joining us, we've had a major decision out of the Health and Human Services. They've issued an order to the University of Vermont that was forcing abortion coercion of nurses and medical professionals to engage in abortion procedures against their conscience. That's bad enough. Bad enough that they're doing abortions at the hospital anyways. Then bad enough that they're forcing and coercing the participation in the abortion procedure. And then then take it one step deeper. And this is the thing that bothers me. The whole thing bothers me, but I'm very happy with the conclusion of this. But CC Howells here, senior counsel for the ACLJ, you pointed this out in our pre-meeting, our pre-broadcast meeting, they had nurses and other medical professionals that would have participated in these procedures. These people were on a list to not participate, and they compelled them to do it.
Yeah, so these were elective abortions. This is not something that's an emergency, that's life-threatening. These were elective abortions. So they could have absolutely scheduled nurses that do not have an objection to performing abortions. And they did not. They intentionally scheduled the nurses that had an objection that was registered with the hospital. They scheduled those nurses that they knew morally objected to abortion to participate. And sometimes they would not tell them until they walked into the operating room.
That's what we found out in our case. HHS in our client found that the nurse, who was our client, was not told the procedure was an abortion until the nurse walked into the room when the doctor, knowing the nurse objected to assisting in abortions, told the nurse, quote, "Don't hate me." The nurse again objected, and other staff were present who could have taken the nurse's place, as Cece said. This is from HHS. But the nurse was required to assist with the abortion anyway. If the nurse had not done so, the nurse reasonably feared, this is from the Department of Health and Human Services, about our client, that the University of Vermont Medical Center would fire or report the nurse to licensing authorities. That is only point one of really 5 major conclusions made.
Those. Yeah, I want to go through. Here's the holding. So, we always look for, in your lawyer, you look for the holding. So this is to our audience. Again, if you're just joining us, this is really breaking news. For the first time that we know of, HHS has issued an order that will suspend federal funding to a hospital that forced its nurses against their religious and conscience objections from performing abortion procedures. And as Cece just mentioned, that was made even worse by the fact that they had a situation where they had others available that could have actually done this. But let me read you the 5 findings. We'll go through each one first. The University of Vermont's Medical Center has forced, and this again, right from the order, has forced and attempted to force healthcare personnel, including nurses, so not just nurses, into assisting with abortions over their conscience-based objections. So number one, they established there was a conscience-based objection to the abortion procedure, and they were, look at the word they used, forced them to participate into this procedure. That's number one. Number two, the University of Vermont intentionally, unnecessarily, and knowingly schedules nurses or other healthcare personnel who have religious or moral objections to abortion to assist with the abortion. So, Cece, let's elaborate on that. We're going to go through each one of these, but let's elaborate on that one.
Yeah,
that, to me, is the most egregious.
That's terrible, because that's intentionally. This isn't just, we made a mistake, or we didn't, know, or we didn't have anybody else available. This is, they intentionally did it. They wanted to violate these nurses who have a moral objection to killing a baby. They wanted to force them to have to participate in it.
All right. That's just 2. Here's number 3. University of Vermont subjects healthcare personnel, including nurses, who have religious or moral objections to abortion to different terms or conditions of employment than healthcare personnel who do not share the same religious or moral objections. In other words, in that particular case, they're treating pro-life medical personnel differently than they're treating medical personnel that are pro-abortion. So if you're pro-abortion, you're treated one way, given all kinds of accommodations. If you're pro-life and you're opposed to abortion, Jordan, you're treated separately. In the law, that's not equal justice under the law. That's not equal protection of the laws.
It is abortion distortion. And this time, HHS said no more. So you don't think elections have consequences? You don't think who's in charge of the executive branch, even when it can be tough goings in the legislative branch on pro-life legislation right now? Look at what HHS can do. President Trump's Health and Human Services can do for the pro-life movement by taking the orders, using existing law, and actually enforcing it. And you know what? We've learned previous administrations of the past, they had these laws on the books. They didn't enforce them. It didn't matter if they were Republican or Democrat.
Yep.
They didn't enforce them. And what we found here is that it wasn't just our client who was brave enough to take this complaint to HHS and their Office of Civil Rights. There were a number of nurses HHS identified. So think about how many around the country are being forced against their will and against the law to perform abortion procedures. So I think this is like the IRS case. Could be the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, I think it is the tip of the iceberg. It is like the IRS case. So Alex Azars is the HHS secretary. He's done a great job. He has specifically stated, I don't know if we have the audio on this, that he's pro-life and takes a pro-life position. As if that now disqualifies you from government service. Well, it doesn't. As Jordan just said, elections have consequences. One of the consequences is you get Alex Azars as HHS secretary and hires a staff that understands that violating people's conscience is not a good thing to do. Here's the other thing. So we just said that they have religious or moral objections and they treat people differently. Here's another one. University of Vermont discriminates against healthcare personnel because of their religious beliefs or moral convictions in opposition to abortions. So this is specific finding, Cece, by HHS, that in fact there is a violation of a discrimination based on religion.
Yes, and once again, because it's completely intentional. This is not by mistake. This is not because we don't have anybody else who can perform these procedures. This was intentional discrimination, making them violate a closely held religious belief.
Now look, I have litigated what we call viewpoint discrimination cases for 35 years before the Supreme Court of the United States. I mean, I've had cases in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, up until about 2010. So I've done these cases. And I will tell you that we win these viewpoint discrimination cases 9-0. This is a step beyond viewpoint discrimination, though. This is viewpoint discrimination. Yes, we're treating you differently, but then there's a compulsion aspect of this. We are compelling you to participate, forced participation in the abortion procedure. That's the coercive element of this, with the risk of, in this particular case, they didn't tell them until they were in the operating theater, in the operating room. And then B, of course, they didn't recognize their rights when they knew their right. In other words, the University of Vermont was fully aware that these healthcare professionals did not have to participate in abortion procedures. They are fully aware of that. It wasn't like their defense was, we did not know. They knew full well.
Right. And what HHS also points out is, in just last year, 2018, the university implemented its conflict of care policy. And that's exactly where they say refusal to perform the assigned job function, basically they'll lose their job. And that's what they use. They use this conflict of care policy to say you're going to lose your job unless you perform this.
I'm going to save the conflict of care policy for the next segment because that's where you get, it's okay. You get into the viewpoint discrimination issue. But I want to reset this so everybody understands exactly what we're talking about here. So we filed a complaint with HHS. Here it is. This is what we filed with HHS. If you're watching on TV, Periscope, over the website, you're seeing this. Facebook, there it is. That's the complaint. We filed that. That starts the investigation. So we requested an investigation of the University of Vermont's Healthcare Center. So that's what started this whole thing. And then HHS got involved. Let's go through that, Jordan, with what HHS did. I think that's important for people to understand. They started an investigation.
That's right. So they start an investigation. They look into this matter. And so on May 9, 2018, we filed the complaint with the Office of Civil Rights with HHS, Department of Health and Human Services, on behalf of our client, a nurse at the University of Vermont Medical Center, which is known as UVMMC. Our complaint alleged, it was a conscience and religious discrimination complaint, that the center forced the nurse to assist in an abortion in violation of the nurse's conscience rights and the federal laws that protect those conscience rights. As a result of the investigation, so that was filed in May of 2018. Just a little bit more than a year later, August 28th, 2019.
Today.
Today. The University of Vermont Medical Center was found to have forced the nurse to assist in an abortion against her will and moral and religious objection. The nurse was not told the procedure was an abortion until she walked into the room. I mean, think about that.
Yep.
That they knew that she objected to abortions. This is all found by HHS. Now they have 30 days to either comply with HHS or lose all federal funding in the future.
Your support of the ACLJ and standing up for life makes a huge difference. You saw it right here. We always have a petition up defending life. We encourage you to do it. We also encourage you to support the work of the ACLJ. You see victories like this. You could do that at aclj.org. We'll be back with more in just a moment.
Pro-life doctors and nurses are being pressured and even forced into assisting in abortions. Pharmacists are targeted for refusing to dispense abortion pills. The right of conscience, the right not to violate one's faith, is one of the most sacred rights we all possess. Federal laws protect medical professionals and religious hospitals from being forced to violate their faith. But many times these federal laws are ignored or unenforced. At the ACLJ, we're defending doctors, nurses, and other medical professionals. We filed formal public comments supporting a new federal rule ensuring that conscience rights will be protected and that entities that force medical professionals to perform or assist in abortions will lose federal taxpayer funding. But now the radical left and the abortion industry are filing lawsuits to overturn this rule. Sign on today to our petition to stop doctors and nurses from being forced to perform abortions. Add your name online, aclj.org.
When a woman gets pregnant, their motherly instincts just kick right into gear. It's how we're wired, it's how we're created, and I short-circuited mine.
I still remember staring up at that bright light and counting backwards from 10.
It was very, very painful. I've never felt pain like that in my life. I remember the nurse giving me sedation, and she just kept rubbing my arm, shushing me.
I didn't want the baggage because I had a vision for my life and it didn't include children.
When I found myself pregnant, Roe v. Wade had just happened. It was all in the news. I called my doctor. He said, no problem. We can take care of it.
I was told that it was just a blob of tissue. I wasn't given any choices as far as ultrasounds or why don't you go home, think about it, and then come back. Nothing like that. There was nothing positive.
When I stood up and I fainted, I think I fainted because of the horror of what I had done. I realized that I was missing a large part of me.
I actually ended up being pretty volatile and got a little physical with the nurse. I slapped her across the face. And I remember because I didn't want anyone to see me. I didn't want anyone to know. They don't let you walk back out the front. There's a private exit. And later on in life, I wondered, had I seen someone like me in the state I was in at that moment after that abortion walk back out the front clinic, maybe I wouldn't have done it.
Well, big win out of Health and Human Services. And we're going to have Frank Mannion come on. But before I have Frank come on, I'm going to go play for you. This is what the Secretary of Health and Human Services has said about the pro-life position. This is when we talk about elections having consequences. Here's one. Take a listen.
Let me be really clear. President Trump, Vice President Pence, and I are part of a pro-life administration. We stand for protecting the sanctity of human life from conception until natural death. Part of that is this regulation you mentioned that we put out that prevents these Title X family planning monies from going to supporting the abortion enterprise. For too long, that money has been used to subsidize the provision of abortion.
There you have it. I mean, that's your HHS secretary. It's pretty refreshing, I have to say. Frank Mannion, senior counsel for the ACLJ. Frank, how did this case start?
Case started, Jay, by this nurse in Vermont contacting us. Actually, she was referred to us by a doctor at UVMMC. We went up and met with her, Jeff Surtees and I, and we've made several trips up there as part of this investigation and part of our investigation. And we were obviously aware of the existence of the Office of Civil Rights, especially the new Conscience and Religious Freedom Division that was created in January of 2018. So we filed the complaint that you've already showed the viewers and talked about with the listeners. It's been a while. I can say this, there's not too much I can say about the investigation. We weren't privy to all parts of their investigation, but it was an extremely thorough, painstaking investigation. Jeff and I sat in a room a couple weeks ago where 3 seasoned attorneys from the Department of Health and Human Services grilled our client for over 5 hours about every aspect of her story, up and down, left and right, trying to make sure that they, were on solid ground in what they've done today. And that was in addition to a 2.5-hour telephone interrogation that they had conducted over previously. And after they spoke to our client, they went and interviewed, it's my understanding, approximately a half dozen other UVMMC employees. They have solid grounds for what they've done today, and we're just thrilled that finally somebody is enforcing the Church Amendment.
Well, the Church Amendment's been around since, as CC was saying, since 1973.
1973,
Correctly.
So this is nothing new. It's
Except
just
it's never
been
applied.
enforced, ever.
Yeah, this is the irony of this is, you say all these administrations, Democrats, Republicans, nobody enforced this, Frank.
Nope, nobody. And, that's what I was echoing what Jordan was saying earlier. We have filed complaints with HHS over the years, and we didn't, after a while we realized they weren't going to go anywhere. We've even tried to bring causes of action in lawsuits that we filed, but because the Church Amendment, it can't be enforced privately. There's no private right of action. We've always been shot down. This is what we need to have done, and today it's being done.
I'll tell you this. Look, this is a major victory. A really significant victory for our clients and for the life cause, and there's no question about it. But, Cece, I want you to reiterate a point and then get Frank to comment on this. The thing that, it's all shocking, but what's really shocking is they have this, list of people that have conscience objections,
yes,
and they ignore it. Not only ignore it, you say intentionally.
Not only ignore it, I'd say they actually use it to see, now, who has an objection to performing an abortion. Those are the people that we are going to force to participate in abortion against their moral objection that we have on record. And we have other people that can do it.
All right, so Frank, let me read. This is one of the findings from HHS. University of Vermont Medical Center intentionally, unnecessarily, and knowingly scheduled nurses or other healthcare personnel who have religious or moral objections to abortion to assist with abortion. This is what Cece was just talking about. Explain to everybody what that actually means.
I can give you some more insight on that from our client's own statements that she gave to HHS. At this hospital, each day the managers would sit down towards the end of the day and schedule the next day's procedures. Okay, there were people on the nursing staff who preferred not to work on certain kinds of cases for strictly medical reasons. They didn't feel as proficient in vascular surgery, let's say, or they preferred to work later in the day. Never were those people scheduled for the thing that they said they didn't feel comfortable doing. But frequently, very frequently, the people who were on the conscientious objector list for abortions found themselves, when they showed up for work the next day, on the board, scheduled to go into an abortion procedure in, let's say, 15 minutes. And that puts them in the most difficult situation of having to go hat in hand to their boss and try to get their boss to accommodate their religious beliefs. And that's got to stop. And we think that's what HHS really is getting angry about here.
Frank, what was the time frame of this? People need to understand how long, it moved actually for government. This moved very quickly. This was a lot of work by you and your team to get this thing to this point, to get this case to this point.
We were first contacted in April of 2018, and we filed this complaint in May. But just reading what HHS has issued today, they were doing a lot of things behind the scenes that we didn't know about. Yep. It's not their role to tell everybody what they're doing. We knew certain things they would do when they would want to speak with our client. We provided them with some names of other nurses, and I believe those are some of the nurses we see referred to in what they've issued today. So, I'm impressed with the investigation that they did, the parts of it that we were privy to, and I'm sure that the parts that we weren't privy to were just as thorough. And they weren't going to go off here, without making sure they had all their I's dotted and T's crossed. And I'm happy to see that's what they've done.
As Frank said, HHS found that there were a number of healthcare personnel there, at least since the spring of 2017, who intentionally, unnecessarily, and knowingly were scheduled by the University of Vermont Medical Center to assist with elective abortions, so abortions for no health reason whatsoever, against their known moral or religious objections. So it wasn't just our client. Our client helped lead the charge at this one hospital, but what HHS found was that this was going on widespread with the nurses and medical staff.
And this is a huge issue, folks, and a huge win. That's going to do it for the broadcast today. What a significant victory. We want to thank you for allowing us to do this kind of work. Without your support, we don't get to do it. You've made a huge difference. Again, I encourage you to continue to support the work of the ACLJ. You can do that at aclj.org. Sign on to our petition to defend life. We're seeing these victories. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, win. Second Circuit, win. Supreme Court, win. And now HHS, another huge victory. Again, support the work of the ACLJ at aclj.org. We'll talk to you next time.
Pro-life doctors and nurses are being pressured and even forced into assisting in abortions. Pharmacists are targeted for refusing to dispense abortion pills. The right of conscience, the right not to violate one's faith, is one of the most sacred rights we all possess. Federal laws protect medical professionals and religious hospitals from being forced to violate their faith, but many times these federal laws are ignored or unenforced. At the ACLJ, we're defending doctors, nurses, and other medical professionals. We filed formal public comments supporting a new federal rule ensuring that conscience rights will be protected and that entities that force medical professionals to perform or assist in abortions will lose federal taxpayer funding. But now the radical left and the abortion industry are filing lawsuits to overturn this rule. Sign on today to our petition to stop doctors and nurses from being forced to perform abortions. Add your name online, aclj.org.
When a woman gets pregnant, their motherly instincts just kick right into gear. It's how we're wired, it's how we're created, and I short-circuited mine.
I still remember staring up at that bright light and counting backwards from 10.
It was very, very painful. I've never felt pain like that in my life. I remember the nurse giving me sedation, and she just kept rubbing my arm, shushing me.
I didn't want the baggage because I had a vision for my life, and it didn't include children.
When I found myself pregnant, Roe v. Wade had just happened. It was all in the news. I called my doctor. He said, no problem. We can take care of it.
I was told that it was just a blob of tissue. I wasn't given any choices as far as ultrasounds or why don't you go home, think about it, and then come back. Nothing like that. There was nothing positive.
When I stood up, and I fainted. I think I fainted because of the horror of what I had done. I realized that I was missing a large part of me.
I actually ended up being pretty volatile. I didn't want anyone to see me. I didn't want anyone to know. They don't let you walk back out the front. There's a private exit. And later on in life, I wondered, had I seen someone like me in the state I was in at that moment after that abortion walk out, back out the front clinic, maybe I wouldn't have done it.